You're probably seeing the news, right? More intense storms, these crazy heat waves.
Yeah.
And maybe you've wondered, what's the actual cost? Especially here, across the Asia-Pacific.
Yeah, the economic side often gets less attention than the immediate physical damage.
Exactly. So today, we're doing a deep dive into a really key document. It's the UNESCAP Economic and Social Survey of Asia and the Pacific 2025. Our mission, really, is to pull out the key economic weak spots it highlights and look at the solutions they're suggesting.
And it's super relevant, this kind of analysis.
Definitely. Think of this as crucial background, particularly if you're tackling the UPSC exams.
Yeah.
This stuff feeds right into daily mains current affairs prep, and honestly, it's got implications for prelims, too.
Absolutely. And what's striking about this report is how it quantifies the damage that's already happening, not just future risks.
How do they do that?
They use this metric, average annual loss, AAL, they call it.
AAL.
It's essentially their forecast for the yearly economic hit from disasters. And what's really insightful is it doesn't just focus on the huge, rare events.
Okay.
It factors in the regular, smaller events, too. Their frequency, the intensity of all hazards, what assets are actually in the way, and, crucially, how vulnerable those assets are.
Okay, so let me make sure I've got this AAL thing straight. It's not just about, like, a once-in-a-100-year flood. It's more of a running tally of the economic drain from all sorts of climate stuff, big and small, year after year.
You've got it, yeah. It gives a much more realistic picture of the constant economic pressure.
Right.
And the findings, honestly, they're pretty alarming. The report shows that a full third of the Asia-Pacific countries they looked at are already losing at least 6% of their GDP every year because of these climate events.
A third, losing 6% of GDP annually.
Annually. We're talking floods, heat waves, droughts, cyclones, the whole lot. It's not some distant threat. It's the current reality for many.
6% a year. That's just a massive ongoing hit. And the average across all the countries they studied is still pretty high too, right?
It is, yeah. The average AAL across the 30 nations they observed is 4.8% of GDP.
Nearly 5% on average.
But, the specific examples really drive it home. Take Cambodia. Their estimated AL is nearly 11% of GDP.
11.
Yeah. And Fiji, Myanmar, Pakistan, they're all looking at annual losses of at least 7%. These aren't just numbers on a page. They represent a serious drag on their development potential happening right now.
Those figures are genuinely sobering. It really shows how unevenly this burden is falling. And the report also stresses that it's often the developing economies in the region facing the biggest macroeconomic risks.
Yes, exactly. Out of those 30 countries, the report flags 11 as being especially vulnerable from that macroeconomic angle.
Which ones are they?
Let's see. Afghanistan, Cambodia, Iran, Kazakhstan, Laos, Mongolia, Myanmar, Nepal, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Vietnam. And there are a few reasons why they're more vulnerable. Often it's rapid urbanization that's outpaced building resilient infrastructure, proper planning.
Right, building quickly, but maybe not strongly enough.
Exactly. Combine that with often weak infrastructure, especially in coastal areas, and it just multiplies their exposure to climate hazards and the potential for really devastating losses.
It seems like such a paradox, though. The report mentions the Asia-Pacific is this economic engine, right? Contributing like 60% to global growth this year.
Yeah, it's a powerhouse.
Yet so many of these same nations are just not prepared for the climate shocks that are already happening, let alone the ones likely to get worse.
That's a really critical point to grasp. The region's economic success is real, but climate change is like this growing headwind. And if you think bigger picture, these vulnerabilities could seriously derail long-term development, trap countries in this cycle of disaster, recovery, setback, repeat.
The report also gets into specific sectors, doesn't it? How they're being affected. Let's start with agriculture, obviously huge for so many economies there.
Yeah, agriculture is a major focus. And what's deeply concerning are the projections for rice yields.
Rice, the staple.
The report suggests we could see yields drop by up to 14% by 2050.
14%.
Yeah. Now, think about a country like India. Rice isn't just food, it's central to the whole agricultural economy. A drop like that has massive implications, food security obviously, but also incomes for millions of farmers, maybe even wider social stability.
A 14% hit. That's enormous for productivity and livelihoods. It's not just about having enough food, it's the economic knock-on effects for everyone farming it. Then there's energy, which is facing its own big shifts.
For sure. Countries really dependent on fossil fuels, coal, oil, think Indonesia, India, China. They're facing major economic adjustments because of the global push towards renewables.
Right. The transition.
And look, that transition is absolutely essential to fight climate change, but it creates near-term headaches, potential job losses in the old energy sectors, drops in government revenue. It needs really careful management, planning for a just transition.
So it's a balancing act. Need the clean energy, but have to manage the fallout for workers and communities tied to the old industries. What about fisheries? The report mentions that too.
It does, yeah. Often overlooked in these big economic talks. Warmer oceans, changing marine environments. They project fish stocks could shrink maybe by as much as 30% in tropical areas by mid-century.
30%.
Think about coastal communities relying on fishing, not just for money, but for food itself. It's serious.
So right across the board, food, energy, even natural resources like fish, the economic impacts of climate change look set to be really significant, really far-reaching. Now, the UNESCAP report gives that big regional picture, but you mentioned it also flags specific worries for India, using data from places like the EDB and World Bank. Let's dig into those Indian specifics.
Yeah, the India-specific data is quite stark. What really leaps out is the potential hit to GDP. The Asian Development Bank estimates India could face, get this, a 24.7% reduction in its GDP by 2070 if climate change impacts continue like this.
Wait, nearly 25% of GDP wiped out by 2070?
That's the projection. It's an almost unimaginable long-term economic burden. It would affect everything, every sector, every person.
Almost a quarter of the economy. That's staggering. And a big driver, as we touched on, is extreme heat.
Exactly. Right? India's already warming, we see that. But the frequency, the intensity, the spread of these really unusual heat spells, that's expected to increase a lot.
And the impact on work.
Well, the World Bank projected back in 2022 that India could account for 34 million, that's million, with an M of the estimated 80 million global job losses by just 2030.
34 million job losses in India by 2030. Why?
Purely down to falling productivity because of heat stress. It just makes outdoor work and even some indoor work incredibly difficult, sometimes dangerous.
That's a huge number of jobs, potentially gone in just a few years. And it's not just outdoor workers like farmers or construction crews, is it?
No, that's right. The report also estimates that around 4.5% of India's current GDP is already at risk just from lost working hours due to extreme heat and humidity, periods where it's simply unsafe or impossible to work.
Wow, okay. Beyond the workforce, India's massive agricultural sector must be facing huge threats from the heat and the unpredictable rains, too.
Absolutely. We talked about rice yields potentially dropping, but it hits other key crops like wheat, too.
Right.
The World Bank, again, they projected that even with moderate warming, say 2 degrees Celsius by the 2050s, India might need to import more than double the amount of food grain compared to a scenario without climate change.
Double the food imports.
Yeah, just think about the cost, the logistics for a country the size of India. It raises really serious questions about food security and the stability of that whole agricultural economy that supports so many people.
It really does paint a worrying picture. And then you've got India's enormous coastline, thousands of kilometers, major cities, vital ecosystems.
Yeah, over 7,500 kilometers of coastline. And it's becoming increasingly vulnerable. The report points out that nearly a third, 32%, already saw erosion just between 1990 and 2018.
32% eroded already.
And big coastal cities, Mumbai, Kolkata, they're facing much higher risks of serious flooding. Plus, crucial ecosystems like the Sundarbans, they could shrink dramatically, maybe by up to 80% by 2100.
Losing the Sundarbans, the consequences would be devastating. Not just for wildlife, but they act as a natural barrier against storms for coastal communities, right?
Exactly. They provide vital protection and support local livelihoods. Losing them would be an environmental and economic disaster.
And finally, India's track record with extreme weather events recently. That doesn't bode well either, does it?
Unfortunately not. German Watch does this climate risk index. It's widely respected. India ranked 6th among the top 10 countries hit hardest by extreme weather between 1993 and 2023.
6th in the world.
Over that 30-year span, India had over 400 major extreme events. The estimated economic cost, USD 180 billion. And tragically, at least 80,000 lives lost.
$180 billion, 80,000 deaths.
These aren't just statistics, It's immense human suffering, huge setbacks for development.
It's a truly, truly sobering picture of the challenges India faces on multiple fronts. But, okay, the UNESCAP report doesn't just list the problems. It does offer strategies, right? Ways for Asia-Pacific nations, including India, to try and cut these climate-driven economic losses. Let's shift to those potential solutions. First up, embracing the circular economy.
Right, the circular economy idea is really about rethinking how we make and use stuff instead of take, make, throw away.
Linear model.
Exactly. It's about keeping resources in use for as long as possible, getting the most value out of them, then recovering and regenerating materials at the end.
So reusing, recycling, and repurposing.
All of that. The report urges countries to actively promote these systems. For India specifically, it suggests focusing on creating zero-waste cities through waste-to-wealth initiatives.
Waste to wealth, turning trash into resources.
Pretty much. It cuts waste, reduces emissions, lessens the need for new raw materials. It's finding economic wins that are also environmental wins.
Makes sense. Okay, second strategy, fostering green innovation.
Yeah, this means actively encouraging the development and, importantly, the scaling up of climate-friendly tech.
Like what specifically?
Well, the report mentions things like carbon capture tech, more efficient renewables, better energy storage. Supporting startups in these areas is key.
And India has initiatives already, right?
It does. Things like the Atal Innovation Mission, Startup India, these could be focused more strategically to boost climate tech. Plus, tapping into international funds like the Green Climate Fund, the GCF, could really help accelerate getting these green technologies deployed widely.
So nurturing a whole new economic sector focused on climate solutions. The next one seems crucial, building climate-resilient infrastructure.
Absolutely fundamental. You have to protect cities, protect essential services, minimize damage when shocks hit.
So building stronger.
Stronger, yes, but also smarter. Investing in infrastructure designed specifically to handle floods, extreme heat, other climate impacts. The report suggests India could integrate climate adaptation into its smart cities mission, aligning it with the National Action Plan on Climate Change, the NAPCC.
Okay, linking those existing programs.
Yeah. And they also suggest developing climate-resilient special economic zones, SEZs, maybe using places like Masdar City in the UAE as inspiration for green infrastructure.
Building tougher infrastructure just seems like a baseline requirement now, doesn't it? To avoid future losses.
Yeah.
Okay, number 4, developing a green taxonomy. Can you unpack that term for us? What is it? Why does it matter?
Sure. A green taxonomy is basically a classification system. It clearly defines which economic activities and investments count as environmentally sustainable.
Like an official list of what's green.
Essentially, yes. Developing a solid one in India and linking it to the NAPCC goals would be a really powerful tool. It helps steer investment, public and private, towards genuinely sustainable sectors.
How does it help investors?
It gives them clarity and confidence. Reduces ambiguity, Helps avoid greenwashing where things look green but aren't really. It provides a standard compass to guide money towards real sustainability.
Got it. Creates a clear definition, directs the money, and the final strategy involves global climate funds.
Yes. International money pots like the Loss and Damage Fund, the LDF, are going to be vital, especially for the most vulnerable countries in the region.
What can those funds do?
They provide cash for critical things. Investing in climate resilience, adopting sustainable farming methods, helping countries shift to cleaner energy.
So financial support for adaptation and transition.
Exactly. The report stresses that making sure these funds, like the LDF, have enough money and are easy for countries to access is crucial for making real adaptation happen across the region.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. This deep dive into the UNESCAP report really hammers home the serious and growing economic threats from climate change in the Asia-Pacific. Developing nations, key sectors like agriculture, energy, they're facing really severe impacts.
And the projections for India specifically are deeply concerning. That potential GDP loss, the heat stress hitting jobs, the threats to farming and coasts, it really highlights the urgency.
Definitely. But importantly, the report doesn't just leave it there. It offers a potential path forward. Embracing the circular economy, driving green innovation, building resilient infrastructure, defining what green investment means with a taxonomy, and using those global funds effectively.
It's a complex challenge, no doubt.
Absolutely. And for all of you listening, especially those preparing for the UPSC exams, getting your head around these vulnerabilities and these proposed solutions is, well, it's essential stuff for mains and even prelims prep.
Which leads to a really big question, I think, for you, our listener. Considering the sheer scale of these potential losses, the economic and human costs, what single action do you think policymakers in the Asia-Pacific should prioritize right now? What's the most impactful first step? Something to chew on.
A really important question. And for all you UPSC aspirants who joined us today, if you found this helpful for your preparation, please do hit like and subscribe for more deep dives like this one. And definitely leave a comment, any questions, thoughts. We want to hear them. Just a reminder, the main source we drew on today was Down to Earth, DTE.